All right. Thank you for joining me in this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and thank you for staying with us until we got everything situated. I do appreciate you. As always, I do want to encourage you to go ahead and like and follow The Gospel Truth. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe button so you can stay in the loop with what The Gospel Truth has going on. You don't want to miss out on any shows that are coming up here in the future. All this content is on all the social media platforms, for the most part anyway. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Instagram, so make sure that you're flowing over there to support the ministry with a like, a follow, or subscribe, whatever you have to do. And that also allows you to stay in the loop for what the God's Truth has going on, because once again, you don't want to miss out on anything. Also, all this content is on podcast, so make sure you're flowing to the podcast, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Make sure you're doing that so you can support the ministry with a follow, subscribe. Please do that. As always, I do have some shows that are coming up here in the future, and I would like for you to know about. All right, tomorrow actually I have an interview with Dr. Jason Lyle discussing Dr. Jason Lyle's book, Fractals, The Secret Code of Creation. So this is interesting because I don't know a lot about fractals, so I am interested to see what's going on with this. And I think it'll be very educational. I think it'll be a very enlightening discussion. So I'm looking forward to Dr. Jason Lyle coming back on. He's been on, I think a couple months ago. He came on, like 3 months ago he came on, and we talked about the importance of understanding Genesis. And so I'm actually looking to set him up with in a debate or discussion, maybe with an old earth creationist or theistic evolutionist. The only thing is that Dr. Jason Lyle, he only does PhDs. So it's a real small barometer of people I can choose from. So I'm looking forward to setting him up. After that is Angel of Yahweh, also Yahweh. I have Taylor Stewart and Jeremy Wong. They go jump into the octagon, the God's Truth octagon, to battle this one out, man. That should be an exciting one. Jeremy Wong is actually a Patreon of the Gospel Truth, so I appreciate him for his support of the ministry. Then after that, I have Is God One Person? I have Matt Slick versus Carlos Xavier. That's coming up Tuesday, September 14th at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss out on that one. And then lastly is Once Saved, Always Saved True. I have Tanner Adams versus A.K. Richardson. A.K.'s been on before. This is Tanner's first go around with the Gospel Truth. So I'm looking forward to this debate. So make sure that you are staying in the loop. Once again, don't hesitate. If you're on this channel and you are not subscribed to this channel and you're just viewing, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Don't hesitate in doing that. Please do not hesitate. That said, I do want to bring these guys in. I have Mark Stanley. Mark Stanley was one of the first ones, man. You know, everybody has a beginning, right? God's Truth first started doing debates. Mark Stanley was one of the first ones, man. So he's a vet. He's been in the God's Truth family for quite a time, man, quite a time. And Benjamin Duncan, he's been on before too. And he wasn't from the beginning, but he came on and he debated Joshua Olson. If you remember that debate, I'll be posting both of their debates in the live chats. So make sure that you check those debates out and don't hesitate in doing so. That said, let me bring these guys in so they can introduce themselves. How's it going with you guys? How y'all doing?
Good. Thanks, Marlon.
Good. I thank you guys for joining me on the Gospel Truth, man. I appreciate you very much, man. And it's exciting times, man. As I was telling you, Mark, this is my first debate since coming back from the old sabbatical paternity leave. So I've been looking forward to it, and I'm excited for that. So at this time, I'm going to allow you guys to give a chance to introduce yourself to the audience, somebody out there that don't know you. So start with Mark, if you don't mind. Go ahead and give a quick introduction to yourself, man.
Thanks. So my name is Mark Stanley. I come from Northern California. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor, still is. I got a classical education from my high school. Then I went on to the Master's University, which is John MacArthur School in Southern California, and got a bachelor's degree in biblical studies. I'm actually in my last semester right now of a master's degree in philosophy from Talbot School of Theology, which is Biola's school. So almost done with a master's degree in philosophy, and loved every second of it. I have a podcast I should probably mention. This is a good time to mention stuff like that, called Well-Read Christian. We talk about literature, philosophy, Christianity, worldview, and it's geared towards anyone who's interested in living the well-examined life. So people who want to think deeply about things. We read a lot of Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and we talk about profound truths and arguments and how they can and how they should interact with us in beautiful ways.
All right, cool. Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. Let me check on Benjamin, make sure he is good. Are you good to go to give an introduction, Benjamin?
Sure.
All right, you got it. You want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yes, my name is Benjamin Duncan. I've been a Christian critic now for 9 years or so. And I've been a secular humanist somewhat longer than that. I graduated with an associate's degree from the prestigious college called North Central Michigan College. It's a community college in Petoskey, Michigan. And that's kind of the area I'm from. I'm from the tip of the mid area, specifically, I would say about right here. And that general area. And I'm a single parent. I'm a single parent of one 19-year-old. And my girlfriend and I recently had a newborn. So he's about a month old, and we're excited about that. And the lateness of this podcast is entirely this guy's fault. I could explain it to you if you wanted a long explanation, but it'd be tragic sounding. So that's all.
All right, cool, guys. Thank you so much once again for jumping on here, man. We're about to jump into this, man. So once again, the topic is, what is the best explanation for morality? And this is going to be more of have an open discussion, but we're going to start it off with 10-minute opening statements. We're going to follow that with 5 minutes rebuttals. And then we're going to have a 40-minute cross-examination, or more of an open discussion, rather. And then we're going to follow that with 5-minute closings and some Q&A from the audience. Sounds good?
Great.
All right, cool. All right, Mark, you're up first. So let me know when you're ready, and I will start your time.
I'm ready.
All right,
Thanks.
You got it for 10 minutes.
So the position that I want to defend is a position called moral realism. And what that basically means is that I really think there's such a thing as right and wrong. I think that you're making a true statement when you say something like adultery is wrong, or greed is a vice. And I think that you're making a true statement when you say something like self-sacrifice is good, or tending to the needs and desires of others is good, and kindness and generosity are virtues, that kind of thing. And moral realism stands in contrast to views like relativism, where the good is defined as what the group votes on, or what the majority in a culture might think. On relativistic or social contract views, the moral standard is defined as whatever's popular, whatever's accepted. And so, for example, if in the United States people think that women should have the same freedoms and opportunities as men, then that's right for us. And if you ask the question, is it right for women to have the same rights and opportunities? If you're an American, you say yes. But if you're in the Taliban, you believe that women are second-rate citizens or creatures, and that's right for them. And so if you ask them, hey, do you think women should have the same rights and freedoms as women? They say no. And that's the correct answer for their perspective, because what makes relativism true, or excuse me, on relativism, what moral truth is a reference to whatever the society or group or relative structure believes, because morality is a kind of social construction on relativism, for example. Another kind of view, which I suspect my opponent holds, is a version of subjectivism where right and wrong is simply an expression of taste. I may like chocolate ice cream and you may like vanilla ice cream, but there's no truth value to the question of whether chocolate is the true flavor. I mean, true flavor doesn't even make any sense. It's a category error. So on this view, morality is a kind of preference or an opinion. So when you say that pedophilia is wrong, you're not actually describing pedophilia, you're describing yourself, your attitudes, your biases, your psychological states, but you're not making a truth claim. But I disagree with that. I think that when people make moral claims, they're making claims about the world. Just like when you make geography claims or historical claims, or you say something like human beings require blood to survive, or cats have paws, or President Kennedy was assassinated, you're describing external reality with these kinds of statements. And sometimes those statements are true, sometimes they're false, just like with moral claims. Moral claims can be false, they can be true, they can be, but the point that I'm trying to make is that they can be evaluated by reason and discerned by our intuition, and they can be known to be true or false. And so there's 3 reasons that I'm a moral realist. And if these motivations for accepting moral realism sound right to you, then you might be a moral realist as well. The first intuition that moral realists have is that the moral law is impartial. If there's an obligation, for parents to feed their children, for example, then that obligation is binding no matter where you live, no matter who you are, no matter what other people around you think. It doesn't matter if you're in ancient Egypt. The moral obligation to feed your children is still binding. If you're in 21st century United States or wherever you are, the moral law is impartial. And so it's wrong to drown your children, no matter what culture you're from, no matter what justification you have, no matter what your desires are. That's wrong, and it's wrong for all time. The second intuition that moral realists have is that morality is categorical. And by categorical, we mean that moral truths are true even if you don't agree with them. They are not dependent on the mind in any way. They're not dependent on some kind of assent, some kind of vote. They're universal in that sense. And so even if everyone in the world believed that stealing was okay, or sexual assault is not a big deal, or it's okay to judge people based on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character, on my view, you're really wrong. And this intuition is the basis of moral realism in a way that it's not characterized by other views. The third intuition that moral realists have is that there really is such a thing as evil or moral error. And I really want you to pay attention to this point, because in discussions of metaethics, of what is right and wrong, it's very difficult for many moral theories to actually capture what it means to go awry. For relativism or something, to go awry kind of just means you're breaking the social contract. You're doing something taboo. You're doing something that the other people don't like. But that doesn't mean that it's immoral, so to speak. So only on moral realism, at least I'm going to argue, do you have really a robust sense of evil, a robust understanding of what moral error is. Because if you're just the evolutionary byproduct of, Homo sapien behavior, then when human beings exhibit immoral behavior, they're really just exhibiting unfashionable behavior on any view other than moral realism. Basically, I'm going to argue that it certainly reduces to that. And a good example is that when a lion kills a zebra, he kills the zebra, but he doesn't murder the zebra. When a male shark forcibly copulates with a female shark, it forcibly copulates, but it does not rape the other shark. And if human beings are mere animals, and morality is some kind of construct, whether psychological or sociological, then really there's no difference between animals and human beings, and it makes no sense to say that one of them is immoral, but the other is a non-moral, would really be the best way to put it. Immoral acts would just be unfashionable behavior, no different than belching at the dinner table or something like that. And so the non-realist has to say that we shame murder or rape for other reasons other than the fact that it's really wrong. Maybe it's bad for our long-term survival if we exhibit certain behaviors that are not socially acceptable. But heinous evil isn't really wrong. Evil on a non-realist account is just a bad word. It's what you want to be on the lookout for, to pounce on in order to try to adjust their behavior to be more like what you would prefer. But there's nothing really detestable about it. And so I want you to be on the lookout for how each debater is going to characterize moral error. Is it just a really highly stigmatized taboo, or are you doing something really reprehensible? Have you seriously gone awry when you do some unspeakable act of evil? Oftentimes the Holocaust comes up in conversations like this because the Nuremberg trials said, it doesn't matter what your culture said. It doesn't matter what anyone else told you. You violated the moral standard and you deserve to be put to death for it, or whatever the sentencing was. The last part of my view that I'm willing to defend is that I'm a theistic moral realist. I'm a Christian moral realist, which means that I think the best explanation for moral phenomena is the existence of a transcendent moral lawgiver. The reason that morality is the way that it is because there is some foundational substance in the universe, some holy, benevolent, beautiful, powerful creator who creates and sustains the world and filled the earth with beautiful human beings who have obligations to each other in virtue of God's commands. We can get into the details of why I think you need God to ground or explain the objective, binding moral order. But I think it suffices to say that the existence of God is the best explanation for how we experience moral phenomena. I want to note, though, that you don't have to be a theist or a Christian to be a moral realist. Russ Schaefer Landau at the University of Wisconsin is a prominent moral realist. He wrote Moral Realism, A Defense. Eric Weilenberg is another atheistic thinker who is a moral realist. And perhaps on a more popular level, you may have heard of Ben Watkins. If you're listening to a debate like this, you know that he's an atheist who recently debated a Catholic apologist, Trent Horn. Watkins is also an atheist and a moral realist. So I don't think their views are going to be ultimately satisfying because it's difficult for them to explain what the moral law could be if all that exists is matter and motion. And so people who are naturalistically inclined or atheistically inclined are not usually fans of moral realism because it complicates their picture of the world. It's hard to understand what kind of thing a moral law could be if it's not physical. So the most coherent form of moral realism is going to be a theistic one. But in closing, I want to say that there are, real quick, three ways to defend moral realism. The first is the reference to the explanatory power of moral realism. Those three things that I cited for reasons that I defend moral realism are going to make a lot more sense with our experience and our intuitions. The second way to defend moral realism is to offer criticisms of anti-realist views. And the truth is that social contract theories or subjectivistic theories just are not that good. They don't do a good job at capturing our intuitions about what morality is. And then the third thing you can do is that you can undermine objections to theistic moral realism. And you can say, look, you've got objections, but they're just not that good when cross-examined. So I'm prepared to do that tonight. And I thank you for your time and your patience. And I thank Benjamin Duncan for being here and Marlon Wilson for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Mark, for that opening statement. All right, Benjamin, you're up for your opening statement. Let me know when you're ready and I'll restart your time.
Okay. The bell means 10 minutes or the bell means a minute left? I forgot.
Yeah, 1 minute left.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm probably going to go over, just so you know. Okay. I'm ready.
All right. You got it.
Philosophers at one time separated all human matters into three categories: aesthetics, truth, and ethics. Truths are statements which describe objective reality. Aesthetics are matters of preference about matters such as taste, beauty, food, comfort, lifestyle, existence, etc. Ethics entail human decisions or guidelines which adjudicate internal conflicts between personal or self-serving and extrapersonal or other-serving interests. My opponent and I are in agreement, at least in a matter of speaking, that the last of these categories is unnecessary. We assert that categories should be limited to two: aesthetics and truth. If the morality's characteristics do not warrant a unique category, then the phenomena must fit comfortably into one of the other categories. Morality must either be a matter of objective truth or an aesthetic preference. On this matter, my opponent and I hold opposite views. He claims that a rampage shooting is wrong is a type of truth assertion, similar to 8 + 8 = 16 or the rock is in the river, while I claim it is a type of blunt value judgment or intense aesthetic statement, similar to sewage is disgusting or it is terrible to be disemboweled. Our analysis of this matter will be similar to how physicists analyze whether beams behave as waves or particles. The various examples and questions we raise will compare and contrast the properties or characteristics of ethics to the properties and characteristics of truth and aesthetics in order to reveal which phenomenon ethical thought better resembles. Do moral judgments behave as truth assertions or as matters of taste? I assert that in every way, shape, and form, the phenomenon of moral thought resembles characteristically the phenomenon of aesthetics. In other words, moral judgments depend, though not entirely, upon human value judgments or what some would call subjective preferences. They also depend upon truth warrants, but this is something I will explain in time. The reason the subjectivity of moral statements is difficult for some to grasp is because the popular comprehension of moral thought is flawed. This in itself is consistent with the phenomenon of subjective preference, because the popular comprehension of all such phenomenon is flawed. All aesthetic standards can be differentiated as fine versus blunt. Fine preferences are typically what we think of when we think of preferences. They tend to lack intensity and differ from culture to culture and from person to person. Chocolate versus vanilla, action movies versus musicals, 68 degrees versus 73 degrees, an elastic waistband versus blue jeans fastened via a leather belt. Most people acknowledge that to choose one of these options versus another reflects a personal intrinsic preference. This recognition tends to not be granted as easily to blunt preferences. Blunt preferences tend to be nearly universal and far more intense. Chocolate ice cream versus eating sewage. A romance movie versus staring at a concrete wall for a month. A 68-degree room temperature versus negative 15 degrees. A comfortable couch versus laying on a pile of hot coals. Wearing elastic pants versus being disemboweled. Of course, not wanting to eat sewage, be imprisoned, stay in a freezing room for long periods, have third-degree burns over 90% of the body, suffer unbearable pain are preferences. But because they are so nearly universal and so intense, we rarely think of them as such. Similarly, morality has a fine preference aspect that we call etiquette. Like the taste for ice cream in movies, etiquette standards differ from culture to culture, from person to person, and are not very intense. Should the F word be barred from all conversation? What about the C word or the R word or the N word? Is it a big deal to leave the toilet seat up? Should you be courteous to other motorists by turning down your car radio at a stoplight? Most can comprehend that their own answer to such questions would reveal a personal preference. On the contrary, few would comprehend that the same about their judgments pertaining to theft, criminal violence, or sexual assault. As blunt value judgments, views on such behaviors are nearly universal to all humans, save for an occasional sociopath or psychopath, and are so intense and involuntary that we lack the capacity to ignore or second-guess them. This involuntary aspect of moral value standards is also not unique. All conscious decisions and judgments are ultimately rooted in intrinsic, unconscious, automatic, and involuntary impetuses that are hardwired into the human mind and are not subject to deductive reasoning. Just as a typical person lacks the ability to judge that sewage is tasty or being disemboweled is pleasurable, a typical person lacks the ability to judge that school shootings are positive events. Not only is this obvious, but it's something we know through brain studies. The human brain is equipped with cells called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons cause us to interpret the perceived pain of others as though it is our own pain. Individuals hooked up to EEGs and MEGs will exhibit the same type and degree of neural arousal when exposed to imagery of others experiencing strife, pleasure, joy, remorse, etc., that they will exhibit when experiencing these feelings themselves. This intrinsic involuntary reaction to the pain of others is so pronounced that one can say that human beings are sympathy machines. The most common criticism of the idea that blunt moral judgments are rooted in a subjective value warrants is that we treat such judgments as incontrovertible. When a person argues against, say, a vaccine mandate, that person is going to make appeals to standards which he doesn't treat as subject to debate. Why shouldn't we have vaccine mandates? Because they violate human liberties. Hardly anyone in such a discussion will ask, why is it good to have human liberties? They instead treat the unspoken warrant, liberty is good, as a given. The reason this is the case is commonsensical. We treat the quote-unquote badness of homicide, theft, tyranny, and exploitation as a given because we are incapable of doing otherwise. These assertions are a given because sympathetic thought is hardwired into the human mind, and we lack the capacity to second-guess it. This can be explained philosophically as well as psychologically. All value judgments are rooted in a standard of value. A standard of value is a characteristic of a mind. Declaring anything unimportant, dismissible, or frivolous would imply a value judgment. Thus, in order to judge your own value judgments as unimportant or dismissible, one has to appeal to the very mind which produces them. To say, I assert that homicide is wrong, but that assertion is unimportant, would be the equivalent of asserting, according to my standard of value is unimportant. This is, of course, a paradoxical statement, not unlike everything I say is a lie, or I cannot truly know anything, as it is declaring it unimportant that the standard is unimportant. Since my standard of value is unimportant is a cognitive paradox, a mind cannot think it. Some of our flawed comprehension is due to language and its legacy. Moral preferences are usually expressed as declarative sentences, the same grammatical form as truth assertions. It is wrong is almost always said instead of I find it wrong or I judge it as wrong. We say you should apologize to your wife instead of apologizing to your wife. It would serve your desire to keep her happy. This suggests nothing more than the fact that our language is a legacy of pre-Enlightenment thought. The way we verbalize moral statements is different from how we verbalize other intense aesthetic statements. For instance, we also say, grandma's house stinks, or we should order a pizza. I'm actually under time. Okay. To conclude, I would say that in every way, shape, and form that we're going to go over this issue, and I'm going to end a little early, which is fantastic. Morality fits the idea that it is a subjective preference and does not fit the idea that it is a truth assertion. In fact, I have no clue how you can even make that work. That is all.
All right. Thank you, guys, both of you, for those opening statements. All right, Mark, you're up for your 5-minute rebuttal. Let me know when you're ready, and I will start your time.
Ready is Freddie. If Freddie.
All right, you got it for 5 minutes.
Thanks. I don't know if I'll use the full 5 minutes because, frankly, I, in some sense, would actually rather engage rather than lecture. But it's interesting to me, and hopefully this will be a primer on our conversation, that Benjamin admits to the universality of certain moral judgments. That's very surprising because almost always the debate centers around whether there really is such a thing as judgments that are incontrovertible. Because it really sounds to me like your position is really close to mine when you say something like, nobody is capable of doubting that school shootings are bad. I mean, honestly, in some sense, I feel like I can relax because it's like, well, if you agree with that, then it really seems to me like people are making truth claims, and at least they think that they're making truth claims. And so then the question becomes, well, are they really making truth claims? And what I want to say is that if it's true that everyone thinks that they're making truth claims, and it's true that those truth claims obtain, then moral realism is true. And so when you say something like, liberty is good is just a given because we all believe that it's unquestionably true, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, then where exactly are we disagreeing? Because it seems to me like Duncan's position is that he's saying it's an incontrovertible preference. And so it's like saying that we prefer sandwiches to sewage. But even that is funny to me because it seems to me like it's true that human beings are oriented in certain ways to recognize that sandwiches have nutritional value and sewage doesn't. And so you can't reduce the difference between sandwiches and sewage to mere preference. As a matter of fact, if someone preferred sewage over sandwiches, we'd say that there's something wrong with you. You have a slew of false beliefs. You are misformed in a certain way. Something has gone awry. And I think that we'll be able to unpack this more, hopefully, in a more conversational tone. One of the things I also want to say is that Benjamin made a sharp contrast between truth claims and aesthetic claims. And he basically lumped ethical claims in with he basically lumped ethical claims in with aesthetic claims. Aesthetic, by the way, for those who might not know, are claims about beauty. So statements like the sunset is beautiful, or this is pretty, or things like that are aesthetic claims. But what I'm sure we're going to disagree about is that I also think that aesthetic claims are truth claims. And I'm going to make a distinction. And this is going to be an important distinction. I'm going to make a distinction between preference and truth. Because when Benjamin Duncan says that it's incontrovertible that school shootings are bad, I'm in some sense scratching my head because I'm like, well, someone doesn't think that school shootings are bad because they're the ones doing them. So it's not necessarily fair to say something like, well, everyone thinks that school shootings are bad. It's like, well, not everyone. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is there a truth value to this question of whether school shootings are bad, or is it just preference? And that guy prefers to shoot up schools in his free time, and I prefer to not shoot up schools, and let's all just try to get along, guys, because there's no real truth value here. I just don't think that that's really doing justice to our moral sense. And I think when we say things like school shootings are wrong, we are really describing the thing, the activity. We're not reporting on our psychological states. So I see that I am out of time, and that's going to be perfect. Oh, no, I have one more minute, but I'll give up the minute.
All right, cool. All right, thank you, Mark, for that rebuttal. All right, Benjamin, you're up for your 5-minute rebuttal. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll start your time.
I'm ready.
All right, you got it for 5 minutes.
Okay, I was mislistened to. I said they are treated as a given, and they are treated as incontrovertible. I didn't say that they actually are. But the idea that no one doubts their idea that school shootings are bad is not consistent with your view at all. It's consistent with my view. We hold false truth assertions all the time. We get math questions wrong. In this discussion, one of us is making a factual error. We're capable of making factual errors all the time. What we're not capable of doing, or I'm not capable of doing, and you're probably not capable of doing it either, is slitting a baby's throat. So moral judgments or subjective value judgments, which are rooted in an intrinsic, unquestionable standard that you're incapable of second guessing, is completely compatible with my view. It's not compatible with yours. I can totally believe false things. You believe that I believe false things as I'm speaking right now. So I don't know where this concept comes from that because moral judgments are true, therefore we have to believe them. I think that doesn't even consistent with how truth works. We believe false things all the time. Going back to your original dialogue, I am not a moral relativist, and this always drives people crazy when I say this. I get gasps all the time whenever I mention this. Relativism contains the idea that morality is subjective, but it also contains the idea that we can judge, or should, which is actually self-refuting, other people's moral behavior based upon their background, their culture, etc. So while I would say that you can say that Uncle Joe isn't such a terrible person when he beats or hits Aunt Margaret because that's the way he was raised, a moral relativist would assert that I can actually say it's good that Uncle Joe hit Aunt Margaret because that's his point of view. My point of view is actually that's impossible. You actually can't make that judgment because your moral assertions are rooted in intrinsic standards that you're not capable of second guessing. You actually can't think with Uncle Joe's mind. So I would actually assert that moral relativism is actually a psychologically impossible idea. I'm also not a contract theory social constructionist, I think was the word you used. The idea that if you ever watched a movie called I Am Mother, which is about a robot, it very neatly illustrates this idea that we don't make moral choices at all based upon some kind of idea to try to keep the society together, or you don't hurt me and I don't hurt you, or following these kinds of fine principles. That's not how it works at all. Morality is based upon the human quality of sympathy that is ingrained in our minds. It is not consistent. It is not principled. It's somewhat principled, but it's not that principled. And if you really followed this social contract theory, you would probably do with the robot I Am Mother, which means that you would annihilate the entire human race and then start over again, because that would ultimately help more people, because there's going to be more generations down the line who end up benefiting from this better race of people than the one generation you obliterated. And if you watch I Am Mother, you'll see that almost no one agrees with the robot. So that is not how our morality works. Our morality does not work based upon some social contract or some idea of, whatever's best for human flourishing or whatever that is. That's not how it works. It's based upon the human trait of sympathy. It's a trait that we can't second guess, and it isn't consistent. It's somewhat consistent a little bit, but not that consistent. It's not based upon these principal axioms that all work we kill pigs and throw the bones in the trash, and then we bury a dog and have a funeral. That's not consistent. Pigs are smarter than dogs. Why do we do that? Because the dog has facial characteristics that resemble babies that we've bred in them over time. So it's based upon sympathy. It's not based upon some kind of principle idea. Moral preferences are. And most of the time, we're arguing with conservatives and liberals about moral issues. They're just like they sympathize with. Conservatives sympathize maybe with a taxpayer having to pay a little more, and a liberal might sympathize a little more with an immigrant who needs health care. And so, I often say when I'm debating conservatives about issues that we can't agree because we're just our positions are rooted in different sympathies. I have a little more compassion than you because I can sympathize with this person who's a little more different than I am, and you have a little less. And there's nothing I can say that can change your mind, and that's just the fact of the matter. We know all the time that people are always debating things.
All right, Benjamin, that's time right there. All right, cool, guys. So now we're going to transition to our 4-minute open discussion. Once again, 40 minutes. Only time I'll step in is if I hear, ad hominems, if we're veering off target off subject too much, then that's the only time I'll be stepping in. But other than that, you guys have the floor for 40 minutes.
All right, I'll go ahead and ask a clarifying question then. One of the things you had said, Benjamin, is that when you're watching this movie, almost no one agrees with the genocidal robot. So I want to really dig down then on your definition of morality. Are you a non-cognitivist? Would you follow someone like A.J. Ayer?
I don't go for isms, or I don't know what you're talking about. I'll explain my position if you want. I don't know.
Okay, so A.J. Ayer's non-cognitism says that
NCMC.
Yeah. All right. That's probably better anyway. So A.J. Ayer's non-cognitivism from Oxford, he championed an idea that when human beings make truth claims, when they make moral claims, they're not actually describing any beliefs. They're not making a knowledge claim. They think that they are, but they're really just describing their psychological states. And so for A.J. Ayer, if you say something like murder is wrong, you're not making a statement about murder. You're actually just reflecting your own opinions. You're just saying boo, boo. Right. It's literally as it's as much of a category error to say that vanilla is the true flavor of ice cream. It's like there's no such thing as a true flavor of ice cream. It's a category error. And so A.J. Ayer's non-cognitivism says that moral claims are not really truth claims. They're not even trying to, so they can't be false, but they also can't be true. It's neither of those things. It's a category error. And do you think that describes your view?
To a great degree. They're also what we call moral, moral statements aren't always just like this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. They also call moral prescriptions, which means you do this so to bring about that result, and that kind of involves objective warrants as well. But yes, I think every kind of value judgment, tasty, gross, good, bad, right, wrong, just means thumbs up, thumbs down in some context.
Okay.
Ugly, beautiful, fun, boring, basically, yes.
Yeah.
It means it is wrong, means I find it wrong.
Yeah. So the challenge that I would like you to help me unpack then is how in the world you're going to be able to make any sense of anything like moral progress, moral regression. There is no distinction then between shooting up a bunch of children and shooting up a bunch of targets. There's no, you can't even have a false belief about that because it doesn't have any truth value. So how are you going to be able to unpack any notion of moral advancement or regression
we have an intrinsic unconscious impetus to think these things, and we're incapable of second guessing it. So how do I unpack it? You can't. It is impossible for you to decide that your own moral judgments are frivolous.
But if it's true that moral judgments are judgments, then I'm failing to see why you can't doubt yourself, right? Like, so if I'm thinking about having an affair on my wife with someone else, and then I say, that doesn't really sound like a good idea. That sounds immoral. I'm second guessing my judgments, right? I'm going back and forth on it. I'm waffling on it. I'm deliberating on it. So on your view, is there any such thing as moral deliberation?
You're forming two different judgments about two different matters. The sex will be pleasurable is on judgment, and it's going to make my wife unhappy and I have sympathy for my wife is a separate judgment. You're not waffling on your judgment. There's two separate judgments. You follow the one that usually is more extreme or pulls you a little more. Because you're an abstract thinker and you have a secondary conscious, we think with words, we tend to have a better appreciation for the long term or the big picture than, say, a non-speaking animal would have. So you're usually going to side more often than not with the sympathy. But those are two separate judgments. You're not. Your judgment that the sex that cheating on your wife would harm your wife is a totally distinct judgment from the judgment that the sex would be fun. They're totally two different issues. They just happen to be in conflict because of what's happening.
Right. But what you had said is that you can't second guess your own value structures. And what I'm trying to ask is, why not? I mean, you can second guess your perceptions. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead then.
I didn't say anything. I didn't ever use the word value structure ever. I don't even know what you mean by that. You can't second guess your own standard of value. And your standard of value about the sex is that the sex will be fun based upon that standard of value you have. And the standard of value that you have about your wife's feelings is that would hurt her feelings and you have sympathy for your wife. Those are two different value standards that are going on at the same time. At least they're coming to butting heads on this one issue, but they're two separate matters.
I agree that there's two different values that are competing. But my point is that if they are values that are competing, then isn't it true that you can judge your own standard of value?
No.
Because you're saying, I value sex, but I probably shouldn't as much as I am. And so I'm going to do something else. Or I value money, but I probably shouldn't steal because my judgment about the value of that money is flawed and I shouldn't value it as much as I am. Those are kind of ought statements. And on your view, you can't make sense of those kind of normative claims.
Because they don't exist, because you're not really thinking of it correctly. Your analysis of the sex is based about how pleasurable the sex is, not on whether it is right to do. Your analysis of whether it's right to do is matter. You're not second guessing anything. You're not second guessing the pleasurableness of the sex. It's a separate issue.
Okay.
You can judge that the sex would be wrong all the time. That's a moral judgment. It does not make that the judgment that this would be fun, pleasurable, not exist.
So another question: moral language sure sounds like it has truth value, and one of the pillars of Ayer's non-cognitivism is that there is no truth value. And so if I say murder is wrong, I'm not making a statement about murder. I'm just saying boo, boo, murder. But it really sounds like when we're talking about moral language, we're using arguments, we're using reasons, we're claiming things and counterclaiming things, and it sure sounds like truth talk. So I'm curious why then you would think that there is no actual truth talk here.
Okay. I didn't say that there is no truth talk. I didn't say that there is no objective. There are no objective warrants involved in truth assertion, moral judgments, because they are involved when we make what I call moral prescriptions. So let's say you made a moral prescription that says that we should legalize scantily clad dress for women because it will encourage sexual assault. There are two warrants involved in that argument. One warrant is an objective truth assertion that the scantily clad clothing will cause sexual assault to happen. The other warrant is a subjective value judgment that being sexually assaulted is bad. Usually when we're disagreeing about moral matters, when people are disagreeing, they're disagreeing about the objective matter. So if we were having an argument right now about whether or not it's okay to outlaw any kind of swimsuits or bikinis, we'd probably be arguing about whether the scantily clad clothing would cause the sexual assault instead of whether the sexual assault is a bad thing. So what I'm saying is objective truth is involved in those kinds of assertions, but subjective warrants are also always involved. So there's always a subjective element, even if there is a truth element.
So our debate then is about whether statements like sexual assault is wrong have truth value. And I've got 3 steps in my position. One, that yes, it does have truth value in that specific example. It's true, and the reason it's true is because of a broader meta ethics, right? Because God has created the universe in such a way that we have social relationships, and harming people and hurting people is immoral, and that kind of thing. So it seems to me, though, like you're holding 2 positions at the same time. One is that moral claims don't have any truth value because they're just expressions of your preference. But at the same time, you're saying, but we all just going to assume it in order to move on for some kind of pragmatic means because we all know that it's true. Like you're even using words like objective. And I'm really confused about how those things are going together.
Well, I don't think you're really listening. I'm saying that there are objective warrants involved when we make a moral argument.
Okay, so warrant has to do with epistemic justification. So when you say warrant, what do you mean by that?
A warrant is a pre-assumed position that is implied by the argument. So if I say scantily clad women shouldn't be allowed to wear scantily clad clothing because it may cause sexual assault. There is a warrant there. One warrant of that would be an objective warrant, which is scantily clad clothing encourages sexual assault. Another warrant is sexual assault is bad. So when we're arguing about it, usually we're only arguing about that objective warrant. We're not usually arguing about the subjective warrant. And the fact that people agree commonly about these subjective warrants, like sexual assault is terrible, or theft is terrible, or stuff like that, is not uncharacteristic of aesthetics. We also commonly agree that being gutted like a fish would be terrible, and that's not a moral statement. We commonly agree that going a week without sleep would be terrible. That's not a moral statement. You'll find those same statements from culture to culture, from person to person. It's terrible to eat sewage, obviously. That's not a moral statement. I don't like sewage. But we're going to agree about that culture to culture because we're the same species. Saying that in every culture and every person to person, usually most people have 10 fingers. That doesn't make 10 fingers an objective truth. 10 fingers is a trait. And the trait of sympathy is common for all cultures and people to people because we are the same species.
Right. But I'm not arguing about whether we ought to have 11 figures. I'm arguing whether the word ought is intelligible. And your position is that it's not really. But what I'm saying is that when I say something like you ought not chop people's fingers off without a good reason, which I can't ever think of why you'd have a good reason, I'm really making a truth claim. And the fact that people can disagree about whether it's ever okay to fill in the blank, right? That's a normative question. That's a question about whether abortion is right or wrong. I don't really care about that for this debate. What's important for this debate is whether such a thing as right and wrong exists. Mm-hmm. And my point is that in our perceived experience of reality, we recognize that there's a difference between a zebra killing a lion and a human being murdering another human being. And the difference is that there are binding moral obligations on human beings that category does not apply in other realms. Like zebras attacking lions.
Couldn't that be that the human victim, that we're judging the human victim because we're human beings, and so we sympathize more with the human victim, sympathize with the zebra? Isn't that kind of a better explanation?
Maybe, but you'd have to make an argument for it, because it's just
I
as
just made an
intuitive to
argument
say
for
that.
it. I just made an argument for it. You're going to size better with your own species. What?
That's not an argument. That's an assertion, right? You'd have to demonstrate why it's more reasonable to think that that human beings have a universal speciesism. And
so
one of
you
the problems
disagree
with
the idea. So you disagree with the idea that a certain species would sympathize more with a mammal species than another species. You disagree with that? That seems pretty commonsensical.
Well, sort of. I mean, sharks eat their own young. I don't know why I have so many shark facts today, but I think sympathy is a human trait because it's a moral trait, right? Again, sympathy, right. You smuggled in a sense of morality. You've smuggled in an idea that we ought to sympathize for people. Right.
I want to pause for just 1 second just to make sure we're getting one thing clear. Okay, at the beginning of before we're having a pre-discussion, you said that your position had nothing whatsoever to do with whether a God existed. In your introduction, you brought up God a couple times. You keep bringing him up, but for me to continue with this line of rhetoric, I have to explain how human evolution is different than evolution of other creatures, and that would cause me to have to assume that evolution, or this would imply to some people that I'm assuming evolution is true in order to have this discussion. So I'm not going to do that. As I said when we were having a pre-discussion, I can make the same argument based upon that a God exists, that a God instilled this trait of sympathy in human beings. Okay, so my position, so just making this assumption, God instilled the trait of sympathy in human beings to be sympathetic to their babies and not to be sympathetic to a zebra. That doesn't make anything objective.
Yeah, correct. Which is why on your view, there's no difference between carving up broccoli and carving up babies. The difference is just the nutritional value, the social stigma, the effects that it has on the continuation of the species, et cetera, et cetera. And so moral realists, who, there are atheists who are moral realists also, want to say that there is a moral difference between carving up babies and carving up broccoli, because you ought not to carve up babies and it's okay to carve up broccoli. And so that's the kind of thing you're going to have to grapple with.
My position is that the reason we assert that is because we're incapable of doing otherwise. Because it is an automatic.
But what I'm saying is but that's clearly false, because some people do carve up babies.
Yeah.
So you said that's something we can't doubt, but people do doubt it.
But there are aberrations in all biology. We've studied this by what's called an empathy quotient. People have taken studies on how empathetic or sympathetic they are, and the empathy quotient, the results of it shows a bell curve. You've got, most of us are kind of toward the middle of the bell curve. And then there's a few psychopaths and sociopaths down here. And then on the other hand, you have the people that would cry over the death of trees or something like that. Bell curves are a biological signature. You're always going to find variations. You're always going to find, some people with 9 fingers. You're going to find some people with 11 fingers. Just like you're going to find some people that don't cry or have any reaction to.
So let me ask you this. Ought you be empathetic?
I feel that you ought to.
Okay. It's interesting that you said you were going to say, I believe.
But I have the trait anyway. I can't second guess it.
Okay. So
you're asking me to second guess my own standard of value, and that's impossible.
Okay. So what I'm saying then is that on your view, there really is no difference between, murder and love or anything else. I mean, like, you could you could describe those things physically. You could describe those things with physics or chemistry or biology or whatever. But there is no real difference between putting a Jew in an oven and putting a pizza in an oven. They're just different arrangements of molecules. That's your view.
Objectively, yes.
Okay.
But we're incapable of judging otherwise. We're incapable of judging that the Jew being thrown in the oven is a good thing.
Well, the Nazis sure thought so. So I'm really confused.
Yeah.
What you mean by that?
Wait a second. The Nazis, though, they didn't really think it was a good thing. That was a necessary evil to prevent some other evil. So if we were arguing with the Nazis, well, just let me finish my comment. If we were arguing with the Nazi right now about that matter, our disagreement would not be over a subjective matter. It wouldn't be over whether it's bad to put people in an oven. They believed that the Jews were going to cause a mass huge destruction of their society and the world, which was far greater than the Holocaust. So what they believed was they were doing this as a necessary evil so to prevent something worse than that. They did not, there is no culture that I know of in the history of humanity that widely believed that it was cool to kill people. In fact, the Nazis, when they were out killing people, their original strategy was to just go take Jews and line them up and shoot them. But they found out that that this was causing personal trauma for the soldiers out in the field. So they devised this system where they put them on trains and they all took them to this camp and then they all lined them up. And then there's just one person who drops this canister down a hole. That one person is the only person who ever executed anybody. They devised that system because human beings cannot do this sort of mass slaughter and get away with it emotionally. They can't. They're not the same when they do it. We're not.
It looks like we're getting a little bit of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's all right. If we disagree with a Nazi over that, we would be arguing about not whether it's good to kill people. We would be arguing about whether the Jews are going to take over the world and destroy it, whether or not.
Okay, but do you think that's relevant? I mean, do you think that's relevant?
Was it relevant that the Jews are going to destroy the world?
Yeah. And
as far as pushing them and throwing them in an oven, if I believed if I believed sincerely that there was a race of people that were going to totally destroy the world and make it a total disaster for everyone forever. I think that would alter the moral consequence of whether I'm going to murder them or not.
Okay.
But
the reason I asked is because it's a. Go ahead.
But by the way, murder, and you've made a lot of statements about murder. That the statement "murder" is wrong as a tautology because the word "murder" implies that you disagree with it.
Okay, well, when I say killing, I mean the unjustified killing of it. When I say murder, I mean the unjustified killing of human beings. But
you say murder a lot of times, and then you ask me to agree with it. I can't really. It's like murder means wrongful killing. So say murder is wrong means wrongful killing is wrongful, and it's just a tautology. It's not really describing anything.
Yeah, but it's more helpful than saying killing. Killing when you.
But I understand what you mean. Homicide. I understand.
But yeah, we'll stay on topic. So it's funny to me because when I asked you, whether you would do it, you did some kind of moral calculus, right? You made a judgment where you said, well, the value of society is probably greater than the value of this group of people. And so therefore, yada, yada, yada. But I'm really confused about how you could do any of those things.
What? I don't know. I don't.
Have I gone wrong?
You're being very creative and paraphrasing me there. I said the overall, a lot more.
You said that if you believed the premises that the Nazis believed, then you would believe you were doing the right thing, right?
Right.
So
you're probably phrasing me correctly.
My point is,
I would say that. When you say that okay, go ahead. I don't want to be interrupting, so just go ahead.
Okay, I appreciate it. The point that I'm trying to make is that putting a Jew in an oven is either right or it's wrong. And when you're thinking about whether you want to do it, you don't think about your tastes. You think about truth claims. You think about things such as, well, it would be worse if the world was XYZ. And so therefore, this appropriate action would be justified. Like, you've got all these reasons, you've got beliefs, you've got so many things that are entailed here that are a whole lot different than just vanilla versus ice cream. Excuse me, vanilla versus chocolate.
Right. And you're not disagreeing with me, and you're not saying anything that I haven't already stated. Okay. In some moral judgments, there are truth or objective warrants. And that particular one has an objective warrant. The objective warrant would be the world will be destroyed if we let Jews live.
But you don't believe that there's such a thing as an objective warrant. You think that all moral claims are expressions of preference.
Say it again. Repeat
you
that.
Believe that all moral claims are expressions of opinion. They're expressions of preference, like vanilla versus ice cream. Excuse me, I said it again. Vanilla versus chocolate. But then whenever you go to evaluate some kind of moral conundrum, you use reasons. Like
let me go back to describe. Let me go. I'm going to my opening, and I'm reading to exactly what I said on this initially. I assert that in every way, shape, and form, the phenomena of moral thought resemble characteristically the phenomena of aesthetics. In other words, moral judgments depend, though not entirely, upon human value standards of what some would call subjective preferences. They also depend upon truth warrants. But this is something I will explain in time. That's
Okay.
in my okay.
Okay, but then when you went on to explain it, what you said was there are certain judgments that we can't doubt. And when you said that, you weren't really talking about judgments, and you weren't really talking about epistemic doubting, like I don't know what I know. Really what you meant is there are certain preferences that you just can't have.
Yes.
But my response to that is that even if you can't have a preference one way or another about, say, preferring sandwiches over sewage, that doesn't mean that there's a real moral distinction between sewage or sandwiches. And what we're trying to get at in explaining our moral experience. Okay,
sewage and sandwiches
that's my point. Okay, Benjamin, that's my point. My point is that there is no such thing as a moral matter. There's no such thing as a moral matter on your view, because everything is just a preference.
Moral matters deal with the deciphering or the conflict between personal and extrapersonal interests. Eating sewage versus eating a sandwich is an entirely personal interest, so it's a non-moral matter. It's not making any kind of value judgment to say that something is a moral matter.
Eating a human being, as opposed to eating beef or something like that, is a moral matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
because
on
I have
your view, there's no distinction.
Go ahead. I don't know. Every time I have this debate with somebody, they just don't listen to me.
It's because you're smuggling in
interest. I have an interest in not wanting other human beings to be eaten.
Okay, there we go.
I mean, I don't know how hard that is to explain.
So then, this is why no one listens. It's because once you drill down on this, then you admit your real view, which is something along the lines of, well, I wouldn't want that, and so therefore, and I wouldn't want to live in a society, or you go on to something else to try to smuggle in how to make sense of normativity, which is ought claims like moral obligations and moral facts and things like this. But if you are going to be consistent on your view, then what that means is that there is no distinction between eating a baby and eating broccoli, except for the physiobiological or social responses to such a thing.
I'm incapable of liking the idea of eating a baby. I'm capable of liking the idea of eating broccoli. That's the distinction. How hard is that?
But that's not a very good distinction, because then when I point out counterexamples. Okay, but you are capable, all right? Because Nazis did do things that you disagree with, all right? So you say things like, "Well, I'm not." You, okay, hold on. I'm just going to go ahead and finish this.
Go ahead.
No, what you said was, well, if I was a Nazi and I had those beliefs, then I would also do those moral actions, all right? And so there's this equivocation that you're using, where when you talk about, say, babies and broccoli, you say, well, I can't doubt that there is some kind of moral impetus here, that there's some kind of moral distinction between children and other sorts of food. But what I'm saying is that in the same breath, you'll say something like, well, there is no difference between a human being killing another human being and a lion killing a zebra. And what I'm saying is that you've mixed up something in there to where you're using moral language at one time, but then you're not in the other time.
You grasp that the human mind. Okay, you grasp that the human mind has several processes involved in how human minds work. It's not just one or two. Usually precepts, and I'm not calling it a precept, they hold to this radical cognitive theory. Everything's about beliefs. Everything's about this causes that, and it causes this belief, and causes this belief. Okay, moral thought is subject to several mental processes. One of those processes would involve truth, and it's in some assertions it does. And one of those processes would involve subjective value warrants that are ruled by an impetus.
Okay, where's the truth? Where's the truth?
The truth assertion involved and it's okay to slaughter Jews. We'll destroy the world if we do not. That is the truth assertion.
Okay, so
the value judgment
is that false or is it true?
Slaughter people. It is false.
Okay, if there's such a thing as true and false moral beliefs, then my position is true.
It's not a moral belief, but it's not a moral belief, but it's used as a warrant in a argument about whether or not
when you say
it's
warrant,
okay to kill.
But when I asked you what a warrant was, you said it's a reason.
No, I don't know if I said that, but if I said that, I'm saying it's part of an argument. It's part of a claim.
Yes. Well, arguments use reasons. They use propositions. They use facts. They use reason. And so what I'm saying is,
they use subjective warrants and subjective value judgments. Also, we should go get a pizza because
no. You're making a category error here. Because as you will then say, if I say this, you're going to say, well, but there's nothing moral about getting a pizza or not getting a pizza. And I'm going to say, yeah, obviously, I agree with you. And then I'm going to say, but there are certain moral facts.
Because getting a pizza, you're confused. I'm saying that anything kind of subjective element can be put into an argument too. I mean, you could say that we should call, it would cost X amount of dollars to have the plumbing fixed in the house. Okay,
but the should is a very different sort of should.
Could I finish my point? It is a subjective value judgment to say you should have working plumbing. It is not a truth assertion that you should have working plumbing or that you should be able to drink clean water. But it is a truth assertion that having the plumbing would cost less money than some other way you would fix it. So that there's a subjective matter. The subjective matter being I want to drink clean water. So then to moral judgments. It's true of all aesthetics. Aesthetics are used in all kinds of assertions about, we should get the pizza. We say that.
So
if
there's a difference, between
we should, but we say these things. We should go see the concert. I mean, that's not unique in the fact that we speak of it that way.
Benjamin, this is what you've missed, man. What you've missed is that there's a difference between. I think I am. There's a difference between.
No, you're not.
What? Yeah, you are.
You're a bit far from understanding.
What you're missing is that there's a difference in the term ought. Right? When you say we should get a pizza, you're saying something different. You're using the word should differently than if you say things like we should not steal.
Yeah.
Right.
When I say
and in one of them, there's a moral truth value, and in one of them, you're expressing a preference.
Right. Well, now you're just assuming that moral is truth. I mean, you haven't established this at all.
No, because when I asked you whether Nazis were justified, you said no.
Can I just say? Okay. When we say we should get the pizza, what we mean is that we would agree that we would like pizza.
Yeah.
And when we say we shouldn't kill people, we are saying we both agree that killing people, it's the same thing. There's nothing inconsistent there. We're using the word the same way.
So I understand.
We both agree with that assertion. We would both agree with the result.
Okay. I understand that was a true expression of your view. But what I'm saying is that when you're arguing with me, you're making an equivocation between the words should. Because if I say something like humans ought not kill other humans, but lions can't kill zebras, you make an equivocation on that point. And what I'm trying to say is that there's a distinction. And so as soon as I go down the line of, well, hey, human beings shouldn't kill each other, and here are the reasons, you say, well, yeah, I agree. And there's a truth value there. But then if we talk about something that doesn't have truth value, you're going to go ahead and say, well, no, there's no truth value here. There's just preference. There's just statement. And so whenever I go down one avenue or another one, you're going to hop on whichever definition or use of the word that you want in order to try to avoid the argument that I'm trying to push, which is that there's a distinction between putting a Jew in an oven and pizza in an oven. Because when I say that, you say, well, yeah, there is a distinction.
I really hope you rewatch this after it's over and a little slower, right out to listen to my comments a little slower than you are. Okay. I am not hopping at all. I've been totally consistent. Some moral judgments involve truth assertions, some don't. But at the root of them all is some subjective preference. I've said that over and over again. That's my position. And sometimes when we disagree about a moral prescription of some kind, we're disagreeing about the truth part of that. We're not disagreeing about the subjective part. And I say that over and over again. I don't know.
Okay,
why that's hard.
okay, but right there. You say, but we're not disagreeing about the objective part, right? We're not disagreeing about the subjective part.
No, we're not usually disagreeing about the subjective part. Not usually.
Yeah.
If we disagree about the subjective part, there'd be nothing to say.
Yeah, but we agree on something. And what I'm saying that we agree on is a true moral claim that is, you're using the word incontrovertible, but what I'm saying is it's not incontrovertible because people violate it and people disagree, and you can have arguments about it, true or false.
Left, and honestly, we have 5 minutes left. And you have said nothing to support the idea that moral statements are rooted in some truth. Nothing at all. You've just asserted that over and over and over again. They're truth. They're truth. You just say
because
it.
Because with a non-cognitivist, you have to first demonstrate that that you're not making a category error. And what we keep getting hung up on is this category error, because you say that truth, you say that moral statements are chocolate versus vanilla. But then as soon as I push on, okay, therefore there's no truth value here, you say, well, there is some truth value because you're making judgments that you can't refute. You can't question your own standard of value. And what I'm saying is, you do question your standard of value. And so if you do question your standard of value, sorry, you cut out. So is
a fine preference. Fine preferences tend to be different from person to person, from culture to culture. Blunt preferences would be like chocolate ice cream versus eating sewage. If you want to compare a judgment like murder is terrible, you have to compare it to a blunt preference like chocolate versus sewage. Not chocolate versus that has a fine preference.
No. See, that exactly is where you're wrong, all right? Because sewage versus vanilla, there's no truth value there. All right? But murder isn't. But murder is wrong. But when you say murder is wrong, you're talking about murder. And this is why we just keep going in circles and circles. Because when you say that's exactly where the ambiguity is because when you say I prefer vanilla over sewage, there's no truth value to it except for your own psychological states. But when you say that murder is wrong, you say, well, there is a component that's true, and that component that is true is sorry, you're breaking up a whole lot, and so I just kept talking. I don't mean to interrupt, but
I have never said that there's a truth in murder is wrong.
What you said is that there's an impetus that you can't deny.
Yes, there's an impetus that you can deny, and there's an impetus I can't deny when it comes to eating raw sewage.
Okay, all right.
I cannot deny that I have an aversion to eating sewage. But that's exactly what you're missing. Okay, because when you say something that you can't deny, I'm going to go ahead and say something like, well, if you can't deny it, okay, let me put it this way. You can't deny things that don't have truth value, right? Denial is something you do to truth claims, right? You don't deny that chocolate is the true ice cream, right? It's nonsensical, right? So even the word denial even the word denial implies that there's a truth value. Are you telling me that chocolate is tasty is a truth assertion?
No, Benjamin. That's exactly my point. Is you're equivocating on chocolate is tasty.
I'm asking, acting like it's a truth assertion. Chocolate versus sewage.
Chocolate.
Okay, we keep going in and out, so you guys are cutting each other off as far because we're having a delay in the internet. So, Benjamin, go ahead and say what you were saying, and then uninterrupted, and then Mark, go ahead and respond to Benjamin.
Thanks.
Okay, I'd like to just spend I spent almost being challenged, which is fine. I like to do a little challenging myself. I have left, but if you're saying that anything, basically all conscious decisions are intrinsically motivated, you're taking the position that God created morality, and then following what He tells us to do would be morality. But following a commandment is not morality. It's a non-moral situation, because when you're following a commandment, you're doing it entirely for your own personal interests. And morality differentiates the intrinsic interests for personal interests versus extra personal interests. So how is following what God do a morality?
Wow, there's a lot there. So, first of all, I wouldn't necessarily subscribe to I think that a divine command theory is true of obligations, but it's not true of moral facts. But really, your objection is, hey, if you follow God's morality because you just want to obey God, then is that really moral? But in the question itself, you're smuggling in the question of, if you were to obey God for some external reason, then that would be immoral, right? But
non-moral. I said the word non-moral. There's a difference between immoral and non-moral. It is a non-moral matter to do something with motivations. So, for instance, if you do something to seek some kind of reward for yourself, that would be a non-moral matter. Brushing your teeth is a non-moral matter because you do it for your own personal interests, whereas a moral matter has to do with the differentiation or the conflict between personal interests and extra personal interests. If you do something because God tells you to do it, you're doing it to try to build your own relationship with God or to seek His favor. And so that is an extrinsic motivation. So it is a non-moral matter. So I'm assuming, for the sake of my discussion, that there's a God. And God has commanded me to do X, Y, and Z. If I do X, Y, and Z, that would have nothing to do with morality. I would do those things because God commanded me to do. I want to seek His favor. So I don't see how a God makes anything objectively moral.
All right, Mark, go ahead and respond. Mark, go ahead and respond to that, and then that will conclude the open discussion.
Okay, thanks. Well, I just disagree that it's not a moral question. I think if God did command things, then we would have moral obligations to obey them. In the same way that when a parent commands things, in the same way that if a parent commands things, you have a moral obligation to obey your parents. Now, the reason that this breaks down for you, Benjamin, is because you don't believe in moral, right? So you think that the moral devolves into the non-moral, which is why when you made a distinction just then between the non-moral and the moral, it breaks down, because then when you talk about moral, you talk about preferences, and then preferences can be moral. You can have a moral preference, you can have an immoral preference. It's the entire thing's a category error, and I wish that we were more productive in our conversation about it.
A moral matter is one that where we decipher between personal interests and extra personal interests. Doing what a God tells you to do is always going to have a personal interest behind it. Doing what your parents tell you to do is going to have a personal interest behind it. You benefit from doing what your parents tell you to do. You benefit from doing what God tells you to do. God, and I'm assuming there's a God for the sake of this discussion. God tells me that I should not commit adultery. I don't commit adultery. I probably wouldn't. If I knew there was a God, He told me not to do it, damn well I wouldn't do it. And I would do that
because it was the wrong thing to do.
No, I wouldn't do it because the God might punish me or not like me if I don't do it.
Right.
Just like just like you don't do certain things because you think God won't like you or He won't favor you or something like that. So you're only acting in your own personal interests. There's no extra personal motivation involved there. So
but on the picture that you just described,
is a non-moral situation. It's just like brushing your teeth. It's not.
On the picture you just described, that there aren't any moral questions. I mean, there's only brushing your teeth or not brushing your teeth.
God damn it.
All right, guys. We'll go ahead and conclude this portion of the debate. Thank you, guys. Pretty good discussion. So right now we'll transition to our closing remarks, and then we'll go to Q&A. So everyone out there, as they're closing, make sure you get those questions in so we can get these questions to Mark and Benjamin. So that said, Mark, you're up for your 5-minute closing.
Thanks, Marlon. So it's hard to recap that kind of a conversation because I think that there were a lot of details that kind of got lost. But the point that I'm trying to make is that moral statements like we ought not to burn Jews in an oven, are different than statements like we ought to get pizza tonight because pizza sounds good. And if there's a real distinction between those kinds of things, where ought to get pizza is just kind of a preference statement, while ought not to burn Jews is kind of a moral statement, then the position that I'm trying to defend is to say that the burning Jews or not burning Jews is either moral or it's immoral. And if there's a real distinction between that kind of a thing, it's not just because that we have certain impetuses that we can't not doubt it, that all of us subjectively have this hardwire to act a certain way, because you could have a hardwire to act a certain way, but that doesn't make it moral or immoral. And what we experience in the moral realm is that there are some things that would be wrong. As a matter of fact, we'd say that if we were hardwired differently, that would be immoral. If we were hardwired to kill people and eat our children and those kinds of things, that would be an immoral way to behave, even if you were hardwired to do it. Now, obviously, there might be some conundrums with like, well, if you're hardwired to do it, can you not do it? Trying to lay free will questions aside. My point is that if there's a category of morality, and if there are statements that can be made that are true or false about moral things, then it stands to reason that our moral experience can be made sense of, and that there are certain things that are required, not just prudent or wise or preferable, but that it doesn't matter what your opinion is on X, Y, or Z. You're required to behave in certain ways. We have moral obligations. That's what the word obligation means. Morality is binary, right? It's either true or false. Either you should do it or you shouldn't do it. And once you know what you should do, it's not really debatable. It's also binding in the sense that you can be held accountable for it. And when you act a certain way, people judge you based on your actions, not because you belched at the dinner table and you really shouldn't have, but it's more than that. It's more than just societal or personal preference. There's an aspect about morality that we discover to be sincerely binding, where it doesn't matter what culture you're from, what your personal preferences are. You as a human being are obligated to behave in certain ways, regardless of your background or preferences or ideas. And the last thing is that it's personal. Moral obligation is personal in a way that non-moral obligations isn't. And so, and what I mean by this is that it relates to persons. And so, a lion killing a zebra is not immoral. This is a non-moral act. But a human being killing another human being is a moral act. Now, maybe it's a justified act, in which case it was a moral act, or maybe it's an unjustified act, in case it's an immoral act. But the point that I'm trying to make this entire time is that if there is a distinction between moral and non-moral acts, then moral truths can be true, they can be false, but they're real. And if they're real, and they're categorically binding, and they're universal, and they're impartial, then and this is the way that we experience the moral realm, then we're justified in believing certain things based on our intuition, based on our reason, based on the self-evidence of certain moral claims. And the best explanation for why human beings are different than animals is not our evolutionary upbringing. You could even grant evolution, right? Many atheists are moral realists, and they would grant evolution, and they'd say, but human beings, there are certain moral standards that are brute facts. And our moral experience and intuition give us evidence of this realism. We experience it in the world just like we experience our regular everyday sense perceptions. And so we know moral laws a priori, and we recognize them in the world. And unfortunately, the piece that we never got to get to, and perhaps it's for the best, but we never got to get to why the best explanation of that moral reality is the existence of God. And the reason we never got there is, I mean, it's okay that we didn't get there, because the truth is that we had a more fundamental disagreement, which was whether morality as a category exists other than preferences. And I regret that we couldn't clarify that and really dig down better. But I mean, debates are hard, thinking's hard, listening's hard, and using language well is hard. So, the conversation is what it is. I would have to re-listen to it to determine whether this has been worth your time. But I appreciate I appreciate those who have stuck around, those who've listened, and I hope that we can finish out strong.
All right, cool. Thank you, Mark, for that closing remarks there. And now, Benjamin, you're up for your 5-minute closing. Let me know you're ready, and I'll start your time.
I'm ready.
All right, you got it for 5 minutes.
I don't think my opponent has said anything whatsoever that supports the idea that morality is objective, or that it is rooted in entirely objective matters, that the statement murder is wrong is like the statement 7 times 10 equals 70. There's not a single thing he said. He just keeps asserting it over and over again. And he's tried, I think he's been a lot more interested in trying to trip me up than he is in trying to understand my position. And that's resulted in a very confusing discussion where he's just tried to, oh, you're committing this. I'm not. I haven't committed any kind of contradiction whatsoever. As we come down to it, my contemporaries and I talk about this all the time. In any kind of debate about morality, the real objection comes down to the fact that people who believe in an objective morality or an objective standard just find the idea that our moral statements are ultimately rooted in intrinsic sympathy, that we're an intrinsic trait of sympathy that we're incapable of second guessing. They find that troublesome. They find that bothersome. They prefer to live in a world where we can appeal to when we're making a moral statement, we're actually, like we treat it, appealing to some objective thing. And I don't doubt that we treat it that way, but the reason we treat it that way is because we have an incapability of second guessing our trait of sympathy, which is hardwired into the human mind, just like our trait of not wanting to eat sewage is hardwired in the human mind, or not wanting to be impaled on a stake is hardwired into the human mind. Now, some criticisms that I didn't get to, because I didn't really get to any really criticisms of his positions. Hopefully I can get them in really quick. It is impossible even to define the words right, wrong, good, or bad in an objective sense. So I have no idea what he's even talking about when he talks about morality. If you try to give an operational definition of right, wrong, or good or bad, you can't even provide one. An operational definition would inform us about the nature and characteristics of an unfamiliar concept. Operational definition can't contain a synonym, antonym, or merely state what category a thing is. There's no way to define these terms, good, bad, evil, right, wrong, in an objective sense. Evil means good means bad. That makes sense. But how do I define good? Well, give me a definition of good that doesn't say, well, good means right. Well, right means good. And that's all you're going to find. You can't really provide an operational definition. So when he's talking about right and wrong, and he's saying he has some kind of intrinsic, some inborn grasp of this provided by a God, I don't see how that's possible when he can't even provide a definition of the word right that has an objective meaning. Saying right conforms to the will of God is not defining anything, since the characteristics of any created thing would conform to the will of God. One would not define a cow by saying its characteristics are determined by God. Obviously, we would say quite a bit more than that. We'd say a cow has horns, a cow provides milk, the cow has, this kind of fur on its body. It's not providing a definition, but saying God provides a definition of morality is not providing a definition. It's just saying where the definition can be found. One would think if we were endowed at birth with a knowledge of an objective truth, that we could at the very least define what it is. While some truth assertions are more accurately describe reality than others, no truth assertion is more intensely true than another. 8 times 50 equals 400 is not more true than 7 minus 2 equals 5. The rock is on the beach, if true, would not be more true than my foot is in the shoe. Moral judgments with their varying degrees of intensity cannot resemble this. It's like a baby's throw is judged is far more intensely wrong than being gum on a bench or failing to recycle. Like it all matters, this makes moral judgments similar to aesthetic judgments. Sewage smells worse than almond glue. This movie was good, but not as good as Braveheart. So if you try to say that truth assertion, I don't really see how you can kind of rationalize the idea that moral judgments, some are more intense than other ones. If we're calling moral matters entirely true, we're saying they're entirely truthful. As we were saying, humans have no interest in moral matters. So for instance, I could challenge you and say, guess what? It turns out that you have 758 years of equity instead of 500. No, it wouldn't shock you because you have no interest. It's an entirely trivial matter. So if you're saying the sheer fact that we are interested in moral matters reveals that we have an intrinsic, inborn judgment about it. That isn't external to ourselves, it's internal to ourselves. If that judgment didn't exist, we wouldn't care. In the back of your hand.
All right, Benjamin, that's time right there. All right, guys, good stuff. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate the closing remarks. So now we're going to transition to some Q&A, man. This is always fun. Hear what the audience is talking about. So with the Q&A, let's make sure we allow the person to answer the question uninterrupted. Both parties to get 1 minute. For 1 minute, you guys will be able to respond to the questions uninterrupted. So starting off, this question is for you, Ben. All right. Yeah, I'll read it out. Let me see. It says, for Ben, where do you draw the line between morality and objective truth? If they are compatible, how do you know your moral truth claims is true when it's based on subjective humans?
I don't claim they're true. I claim that my moral claims are value judgments. Value judgment is a distinct type of assertion than a truth assertion. Just as a question is a distinct type of assertion or statement than a command is. Value judgments are grammatically written similar, but they're actually a different type of statement. The murder is wrong is a different type of statement than I have 5 fingers. It is a different type of statement than go clean your room, which is a command. So I don't think that they're truth claims. I think that that we follow them because we have no choice in the matter. That they're rooted in an intrinsic, unconscious, involuntary impetus that we're incapable of second guessing, and that's why we treat them as truth assertions. But they're not truth assertions.
All right, Mark.
So, one of the root disagreements that Benjamin and I have is that it seems to me like Benjamin is unable to distinguish between arguing about psychological states, like I prefer this or I prefer that, which you're talking about you, and statements about reality, right? So when you say murder is wrong, you're talking about reality. Now, maybe you're also saying that that's your, that you believe it, but that's a different statement. Saying I believe that murder is wrong is different than saying that murder is wrong. And so, where do you draw the line between morality and objective truth? Well, I'd say that if it's a truly moral question, then there's going to be a truth value to it. But not all, statements that sound like moral questions are really moral. So, for example, you can use the word ought in a non-moral sense, like we ought to get a pizza, like, oh, we should get a pizza tonight. That's a different kind of use of the word ought. And so I would certainly draw the line there. And I don't think they're compatible. I don't think you can have one question be both moral or have a moral component and a non-moral component at the same time in the same way. I think that's a contradiction.
All right. And here's a question for you, Mark. And it says, a married bachelor is an example of breaking the law of contradiction. And a married man behaving like a bachelor violates the moral law of God. Is violating morality illogical?
No. So there are different kinds of laws, right? So there are laws of logic, there are laws of physics, there are moral laws. And a moral law is a certain kind of thing that governs normative behavior. And when we say normative as philosophers, we mean the way things ought to go. That's what morality. That's what normative ethics is a question of how ought people behave. And so a married bachelor is a contradiction in the law of logic, which means that it cannot exist in the real world. But a violation of the law of the moral law would be similar to the violation of the law of gravity, where I violate the law of gravity every time I sit up in my chair or stand up to go do something. So different kinds of laws have different kinds of violations in virtue of the kind of thing that it is.
All right, Benjamin.
Is violating morality illogical? I don't know how there's no universal morality. I don't believe that in such a thing. So I don't know how, violate it. You're going to
close enough, right? You think we have incontrovertible ideas.
Let's
we
allow
have
Benjamin
incontrovertible ideas that are ingrained in my mind. I have incontrovertible ideas that are ingrained in my mind. You have incontrovertible ideas that are ingrained in your mind. They're usually very similar, but they probably resemble each other a lot, but they are distinct. We have my mind, and you have your mind, but usually we'll agree on most blunt moral judgments, like sexual assault and rape and things. But we'll disagree about what's called etiquette. And etiquette are fine moral judgments, like whether or not it's okay to burp at the dinner table or something like that. Those are moral judgments too, because they still deal with extra personal interests and making other people comfortable. What is the difference between etiquette and morality? There really is no difference. One is just less intense than the other.
All right. And here's a question for you, Ben. If moral claims are mere aesthetic claims, what would you say about an issue such as racism? Most humans used to be racist. How would one argue against slavery?
Slavery causes suffering, and if I were arguing with a slave master from the 1800s, our argument would revolve around truth assertions. It wouldn't revolve around subjective warrants regarding. I don't know why you're giggling. You just don't listen. Okay. Our argument would revolve around the truth assertion that the slave is not born, or the black person, if he's a black slave, was not born to be put in the field and hit with a whip. He believes he's born to be that way. He believes that person has inborn characteristics and that he can't that make him preordained or made to be in that position. I don't believe that. I believe that that person has the same same qualities and characteristics that a white person might have. So our disagreement would be over a truth assertion. But our disagreement would not be over whether it's bad to whip people. He thinks it's okay to whip them because as a necessary good, because otherwise that black person is going to starve to death because he needs a master. So the question, what do I say to him? That we could have a viable disagreement about that matter, because our disagreement with the slave master would be over that truth warrant. It wouldn't be over the subjective matter.
All right, Mark, what are your thoughts?
I'm amazed, honestly. I'm amazed. It would be over the truth value? What? No. This questioner has honestly pointed this out better than I think I have. The only way that Benjamin's going to be able to respond to slavery is with an aesthetic judgment. He has to say something like, well, I don't like that. That's an ugly picture. Suffering rubs me the wrong way. That's the kind of thing he has to say, because he doesn't believe in normative claims. He doesn't believe that it's really true that slavery is wrong. He believes that suffering is against my impetuses. It's against the incontrovertible views that I can't not resist. But if you wanted to make an argument against slavery, he'd have to make an aesthetic one. He'd have to say that this is not beautiful in my mind's eye. And I don't think you'd be able to argue against slavery at all. So, perceptive question.
All right. Next question for you, Ben. Suppose a psychopath enjoys raping a child and he has the opportunity to get away with it. If morality is just a preference, why shouldn't he do it?
Well, I would be against him doing it. Why should he do it is just a misspoken thing. It's just a misspoken sentence. I'm against him doing it. And I have no ability to second guess that judgment. How do I
but there wouldn't
convince the psychopath not to do it? How do I convince the psychopath not to do it? You can't. And that's a fact in prisons all across the country. If my opponent's view were correct, then there would be no psychopaths. We could just set them aside and teach them to be moral. But they don't have they don't have sympathy for other people. You can't.
All right, Mark.
So I think you could teach a psychopath to not do that in the same way that you teach a child, right? Because what we do with children is we try to persuade them that morality is something that they should abide by, and I don't think that moral statements are inherently motivating in the sense that you can say this is the right thing to do, but I'm not going to do that. Interestingly, on non-cognitivism, which is Benjamin's view, as A.J. Ayer lays out, that's actually impossible. But you have to be motivated by moral statements if you're a non-cognitivist, because a statement like "you shouldn't do that" is just the statement "boo" on that. And so, interestingly, one of the arguments against non-cognitivism is to be able to make a distinction between saying, I see that that's the right thing to do, but I'm not going to do that. And that's actually impossible on non-cognitivism. But on moral realism, it makes perfect sense. You can say something like, well, it really is wrong to do that despite your twisted perceptions. And that's what you'd want to try to do with a psychopath.
All right. And here's another question. Ben, hitting you hard, Ben. Sorry about that, man. All right, so Benjamin, if there are these motivations that I cannot deny, then what do we do with topics that most people don't agree on? Abortion, economics, monetary policy, war, etc.
Do we just sulk and argue? Because a lot of times when it comes, it has to do with varying degrees of sympathy with a lot of these issues. As I often say, with conservatives that I'm talking about, there's certain things, sometimes they just don't have the same sympathy or level of sympathy that I do, and there's nothing I can do to convince them otherwise. And in responding to the previous comments about psychopaths, I don't think Mark's ever met a psychopath. I've lived with one before, not
wouldn't
currently,
be relevant.
but I have
That's
lived
totally
with a psychopath before.
Right.
You can convince them to alter their behavior by threatening a punishment, but that would be following a threat of a punishment would be following your own personal interests. It wouldn't be a moral matter. It would be a non-moral matter. If you're doing something because you're trying to avoid imprisonment or trying to avoid the wrath of God, that wouldn't be a moral matter. You can't really convince a psychopath not to do something because it's cruel. They don't care. There's nothing you can say to convince them. They do not have the characteristic in their mind to give a crap about anyone else's feelings whatsoever. They lack that quality.
All right. Mark?
Yeah, and that's why we have a name for them. That's why we consider them disordered in some way, because they don't see things the way that they really are. So this question about disagreement is one that I it's so funny that Benjamin honestly sounds like an objectivist when he talks. And so he's getting this question then generally the problem of disagreement falls on the realist. Like, hey, if moral qualities really are real, then why do people disagree on them? And the answer simply is that people have different upbringings. They have different ideas. But people have different perspectives on all kinds of things, right? People have different perspectives on whether God exists or not. But certainly he either exists or he doesn't exist. Someone's right and someone's wrong, right? On abortion, the question about whether the unborn child is a human being who deserves life or is entitled to life, rather. Either the pro-lifers are right or the pro-choicers are right. But there's a real question here. And that's really the point of moral realism. So that's it.
All right. And this is the final question of the night. And this question is for you, Ben. Is it right or wrong to burn people in ovens? What about the law of excluded middle? The law excludes you from saying it's rightish or wrongish. Is it right or wrong?
I find it wrong. I don't know. When we say something is right or wrong, we're just leaving out the word "I find." It's a misspoken statement.
All right. Mark?
So that, again, what I would really encourage Benjamin to do is read some A.J. Ayer, because he's a really sharp fellow. I think he's out of Oxford. And he does a good job at differentiating. When you say that putting a Jew in an oven is wrong, you might be making one of two statements that you have to clarify. All right. You might be talking about the act itself, or you might be talking about your perspective on it, your psychological processes. But if there's a distinction between those two things, then you can say that some things are true of one statement and not the other. Right. So there is no truth value to the question of whether I want pizza or not. Right. We keep talking about pizza. It's just your preference. But there is a truth value to the question of whether it's right or wrong to put a Jew in an oven, or something like that, or at least there could conceivably be. You'd have to make an argument for it one way or another, I suppose. But but I think, again, the question is right on point. For Benjamin, he's going to have to say that there is no such thing as right and wrong. It's just a different way to express a preference, in which case there's no truth value to it. And our moral intuitions here are deeply, deeply flawed. And I don't think most people are ready to believe that, because I don't think most people think it's true.
All right. Good stuff, guys. Appreciate you. This is a great discussion. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And I do encourage you guys to go ahead and rewatch it, man. You know, if there's an argument that you feel that you weren't successful on, or if there was something that you didn't understand correctly, go watch it again, man. That's what this stuff is for, man, to barely scope out our thought process and how we articulate ourselves concerning different subject matter. And I thank you guys for coming on, man. And any closing words before I shut this thing down?
Hey, I just want to say thank you to both of you. And, you know, even though in any kind of conversation that really matters, you know, emotions can get in the mix. We can interrupt each other and that kind of thing. And so I just want to say that I'm sorry for not behaving as well as I might have been able to. But honestly, I think we both did okay.
Benjamin?
I'm just going to apologize again to Mark and Marlon for the half an hour wait I made them sit through. I was having some sort of crazy domestic problem here. My girlfriend decided tonight that she was not going to allow me to do this just because she was wacky. So I tried to go to the park to try to do this, and it didn't work here. I had to come back home and wait for her to leave to go to her mom's for 2 days in order to have the discussion. So that's why they had to wait. And they were very patient and very understanding about the whole situation, even though we scheduled this months ago. And Mark has been a very nice guy to me offline, and so has Marlon. Marlon's always been very friendly to me. They're both on my Facebook. I said Marlon's on my Facebook. And I chat with him and try to get under his skin a little bit about some of the things he says. But he's always friendly about it. And, we don't debate much, but we talk a little bit. And he's always such a nice guy. And I hope him the best of luck on his podcast here and reaching more viewers. And so thank you so much for having me on, even though I had a problem tonight and made you guys wait. But I had a good time.
It's all good, guys. I appreciate you both, man. And obviously, I'll be reaching out to you guys once again. May not be against you two. You two may not be doing it, but I certainly like to mismatch, man, and mix it up and see what we get, man. But I thank you guys, and I'm going to let you guys go. You guys take care, all right?
Thanks.
All right. All right, another great debate in the books, man. First debate since coming back from paternity leave and sabbatical, man. And I thank these guys for coming on, man. It's exciting, good stuff. And, I got a comment here, and I'm glad somebody noticed. I like your new timer, Marlon. Do you guys know how much time I put into all the little graphics and everything? If you guys noticed the little graphics, I put a lot of time and effort. So I really am grateful and thankful for someone to notice it, man. Thank you, Reverend. Appreciate you, man. You are definitely one of those supporters who are continuously watching and viewing. And I thank you for noticing the graphics, man. Yay, I appreciate it. But yeah, I thank these guys for coming on. And don't forget that I have a whole bunch of shows coming up here in the future on the Gospel Truth, man, and don't miss out on them, man, because I have exciting ones, man. I'm still signing up stuff. Debates and interviews are happening. Speaking of interviews, don't forget tomorrow I'll be interviewing Dr. Jason Lau about his book Fractals. So if you don't know what fractals are, if you're interested in seeing what it is, and you're interested to know a little bit about Dr. Jason Lau's new book that just came out in July of this year, make sure that you watch tomorrow's show concerning his book called Fractals. All right. So I look forward to that. Make sure you hit that like and make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any shows that are coming up. Hit that notification bell. Please do that so you can stay in the loop. That said, I'm going to get out of here, and I thank you guys for joining me. May God bless you. May God keep you. Go on.